Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chrissy. If you haven't already hit the subscribe button, I would honestly recommend to subscribe. And I just want to let you know for a disclaimer that this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So let's already get into it. So I kind of want to talk about the JonBenet Ramsey case. This case happened about like almost 2 years, 21 and a half months before I was born. So I never was aware of it until like later in life, and I just kind of want to talk about it, how it's kind of fascinating how a beauty pageant individual, JonBenet Ramsey, how she was murdered at the age of 6 around the time of Christmas of 1996. So I just find it really interesting just because of how the parents had claimed they never heard the death of her, but neighbors have claimed that they did hear her. So there's some inconsistencies, and I found some of the true crime videos I've seen talked about how it's interesting of how the underwear that she was wearing discluded and then included a ton of suspects, and how this happened in Boulder, Colorado. So it's not far from where I currently live, maybe an hour and a half drive away from where I live. And that what had happened was that she was found, JonBenet Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her parents' house in Boulder, Colorado, the morning of December 26th, so the day after Christmas. And that she was a beauty queen that had died sometime during Christmas Day night, but wasn't found until several hours later. And that her parents initially thought she was kidnapped during the night because they didn't hear anything. Everybody was fast asleep. Their house was so huge, and that her mother had called 911 just before 6 a.m. Patsy Ramsey was very inconsolable, as she was telling the 911 dispatch that her daughter was missing and that she had found a ransom note at the bottom of the stairs, and that some of the wording was misspelled, common words, while more $5 words, something I learned in English classes here in the US, was spelled correctly. And that the 3-page note had said in part that if JonBenet's parents had called authorities, that she would have died, and that they were asking for $1,118,000, which was her dad's bonus, Christmas bonus. And that it also stated that JonBenet's parents would receive a call from the supposed kidnappers the following day during between 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. and that John Ramsey had told the ABC News Barbara Walters in 2000 that it was awful, and that the first thing they knew, that they didn't know whether the kidnapper was going to call him that day, because of the note said, "I will call you tomorrow, get plenty of rest. I was deathly afraid that tomorrow, in fact the 27th, and that you'll lose perception of all time, of place," added Patsy in 2000. You've just been dealt with a horrible crashing blow, and that the police officers had arrived shortly after the 911 call was placed, and that they began investigating the scene. Clues from the kidnapper, however, during this time, that the Ramsey's friends started showing up for moral support, and that they had contaminated the scene by moving about the house, so they couldn't tell when they came in, if it was before or after the kidnapping. And that it was a lot of theories had come that the police officers were not properly trained on how to block off a crime scene, and that Diana Diamond, an investigative reporter who did cover this case, that said the police did a terrible job securing the scene, and if you don't secure the scene, you don't get any good evidence. Along with people were streaming throughout the house. They were in the kitchen, they were in the living room. Some of the friends of Patsy's were helping her wipe up the kitchen. There could have been fingerprints there, when you touch a surface, cabinets, tabletops, stuff that would have been touched. They wiped the fingerprints so they couldn't get DNA. And that after the several hours, the police began to leave the Ramsey house. JonBenet's parents were anxious, waiting for the suspect kidnappers to call, with just one detective there. Linda ardent. And then after 10 a.m. had passed and there was a call, the detective Linda had stated that there was no acknowledgement from either the JonBenet's parents that the deadline imposed by the author of the ransom note had come and gone, and that Linda has suggested that John Ramsey look around the house for any signs that his daughter's belongings were out of place, like the bedding and stuff like that, and that he had found JonBenet in their basement, a part of the home that police had neglected to search, and that he knew and that John Ramsey had told Walters in 2000 that he instantly knew what he had found, that he had found his daughter. She was lying on a white blanket, and that the blanket had wrapped her mouth. Her hands were tied above her head. She had taped over her mouth. He immediately kneeled down over her, checked her cheek, took the tape off over her mouth, and tried to untie the cord that was around her arms and could have not untied. He couldn't get the knot untied, along with how John Ramsey had stated that he had brought his daughter upstairs and laid her on the floor, hoping that she was alive. Linda confirmed to John that JonBenet had died, and that Linda said the moment sparked fear in JonBenet's father might have killed their daughter, and so she braced herself for a possible confrontation. And literally, this is so interesting just because of JonBenet's murder case had came on the heels of O.J. Simpson trial and gained traction with the news outlets, and that how this was in the public view. Police sought to question JonBenet's parents, and that so they naturally focused on the parents and her brother, just because the ransom note had been written on a pad that belonged to Patsy's, and they had they couldn't decide if it was actually Patsy's handwriting or not. And the police had suspected that the Ramseys had harmed their child in some way, then panic and try to create basically a kidnapping scenario, and that there are some reasons to suspect this just because the 30-page ransom note, for example, was written in Patsy Ramsey's notepad with the pen that came from the house, and that the money I stated at the beginning, the $118,000 figure, also seemed to be very suspicious to authorities, because usually they ask for $200,000, $1 million, or something else, but that specific amount kind of gave authorities suspicion. And that Garrett has stated that you think about this number and how it's relevant. John Ramsey got a bonus from his company of $118,000, and that how many people knew about that? I'm gonna guess not a lot of people. And I'm guessing it's only between John Ramsey, his wife Patsy, and obviously John Ramsey's business, and that JonBenet's half-brother John Andrew Ramsey said that the family gave blood and fingerprints to the police as part of the evidence. But speaking to JonBenet's parents, the main suspects of the case at that point, as a formal interrogation at the police station was challenging, because Diamond had said that the police are faced with lawyers and wealthy friends, people in the community who tell the police, give them room, they're grieving, what's the matter with you? The police are thinking we gotta talk to the parents, and we gotta talk to them right before they start getting their story straightened together. And that John Ramsey had asked the police to meet with them at their home, because Patty was sick with grief, in bed, barely able to move, and that JonBenet was buried in Georgia, the Ramseys' hometown, on December 31st of 1996, and then the next day, January 1st of 1997, her parents had appeared on CNN for an interview which pleaded for the public to help find their daughter's killer. And that Patsy said that when they found out the main suspects and their daughter found out that they were the main suspects of their daughter's death, she couldn't believe it. And that she had stated, we're all suffering from having lost our child, and then for some reason to accuse you, it's just, you can't believe that would be happening. She had told CNN in January of 1997, and that and then the investigation saying that despite the parents' denials and their son's denials, Police continue to suspect the parents in JonBenet's murder, and that the Boulder County DA, Alex Hunter, however, wasn't convinced of their guilt and wouldn't explore other theories. 3 months after JonBenet's death, he brought Smith into the fold. He quickly began reviewing the evidence and finding potential leads that the police and public had either overlooked or dismissed. And Smith had stated that it seemed as though the parents were probably involved, but she says, I thought I was going to be fairly easy case. I thought it would be a slam dunk, and I remember talking to my daughter. I kind of joked with her, saying that if someone did it in the house, it must have been Santa Claus coming down the chimney, just because it was Christmas Day evening that when the coroner had suspected JonBenet had passed away. But when Smith began to investigate the case, he asserted to believe that the police were actually looking at the possible intruder. He pointed to an open window in the basement, but the photograph showed cobwebs on the window that would have been broken if someone had gone through the basement window, and that police didn't believe it wasn't possible to fit through the window, and Smith showed them it was going through himself. This is still like a theory that it was an intruder, but they also still suspect other people, like the parents. And that the question, Garrett has stated that the question could you have gone through this window, this very small window, without disturbing the cobwebs? And that he thinks the answer is maybe, but the other important point is how soon was the picture taken after JonBenet was killed, because spiders could replicate webs very fast. And that the police had also found a shoe print from the high-tech brand boot near JonBenet's body. No one in the family owned that shoe from that particular brand, as well as 2 marks on her face and back, which he deduced were made by a stun gun, and some people believe it was a possible pedophile, just because some people suspect pedophiles use stun guns, and that there's no reason. Smith had recorded himself saying during this time that there is no reason at all for the Ramseys to use a stun gun, and the Ramseys don't own a stun gun. And if there is not a stun gun, then what is it? That's the question he always asks. And that in the video diaries, Smith pointed out whoever wrote the ransom note included language that was drawn from several movies. Specifically, he had no similarities to the kidnapping drama Ransom, which had been playing in Boulder during that time. And that Smith also spoke to the DNA evidence that the police had found underneath JonBenet's fingernails and in her underwear in the video diaries by Smith. He has stated that the evidence was not something that was made public for quite a long time, and analysts found that this didn't match to anyone in the Ramseys, but there was another DNA evidence forensic person that did conclude that the packaging where the underwear had came from did have cross-contamination, so that did possibly bring in the Ramsey family again. And that after the first formal interrogation of this JonBenet's family in 1997, the spring of 1997, about 4 months after her death, it took nearly 2 years for them to sit down with the police for another interrogation. They returned for another one in June of 1998, but this time the investigators recorded it on video, and that there was months and months of negotiations, things about whether they could be videotaped, the questions they were going to ask, and the Boulder police, should the Boulder police be part of it, said Coral McLean, an investigative journalist, and that the Ramseys had stated that they don't trust the police and that they don't want them there. But pretty much what had happened was that during this whole time that had JonBenet's murder had theories that the intruder theory was regarding the whole murder case was pushed by the wayside because of how with the participation of the official investigation to find the killer of JonBenet, that they couldn't find a good conscience. Smith could not find a good conscience to be part of that, prosecuting an innocent person for it. it would be highly improper and unethical for Smith to stay when he so strongly believed it, and that even though he stepped away from the official role of the case, he continued to push for justice for JonBenet while standing on her parents' side. And that it's really weird for me personally. I honestly feel like the parents had possibly did something to her or her little brother, half brother, just because although the grand jury had believed that one of the parents was culpable and the other had helped, they couldn't say who did what, and Hunter ultimately announced that they didn't have sufficient evidence to file against the parents. So there is actual speculation that both parents participated in it, but they just don't know who actually did the killing while the others helped cover up the evidence. And that in 2008, a new DNA testing technology had been developed called the touch DNA, which allowed forensic experts to test the dead skin cells left behind on objects in the crime scene. And that Mary Lacey, who was the district attorney of Boulder at that time, decided to look into the new test on JonBenet's pajama leggings, and the results came back to have positive for at least one unknown male's DNA, possibly even two. And that it was after that test that Lucy wrote a letter to John Ramsey saying that her office does not consider him, his wife, or any in their immediate family to be under suspicion of the death of JonBenet, but Patsy Ramsey had died of ovarian cancer in 2006 and was buried next to JonBenet in Georgia, and that JonBenet's half-brother John Andrew Ramsey had stated that after 13 years, Smith still believed that the unidentified shooter was responsible for JonBenet's murder, but he was running out of time because he was diagnosed with colon cancer in 2010. He never really stopped talking about JonBenet's case, according to one of his daughters, Dawn Miller, and that it's just really interesting just because of how they're still trying to figure out, because it's still an unsolved case. They do have evidence that it is possibly an intruder, possibly 1 to 2 males. I think it's one of the parents that did it, but now they can't prosecute one of the parents due to Patsy dying of ovarian cancer. And that it's really interesting just because at the end it says, I think the family has not lost their will to fight, and they will. Jordan Ramsey stated, we work on this daily. There's a group of dedicated volunteers to work on this daily, and that he thinks it's really important for people to understand that this case can be solved. He wants to say there is a narrative out there that there's an unsolved homicide and that we have to accept that fact, and that is not true. If we leverage the evidence, we can follow the facts, we'll find the killer. But for me personally, I've heard theories, and the most one that speaks out to me is that John Andrew Ramsey, probably that night on Christmas Day, that he got upset with his sister because she was a beauty pageant, and that something had happened, and that he probably did something to her, because I've heard that she had head injuries, and that he had pushed her and she hit her head on the cement ground of the basement, just because a lot of houses in Colorado do have cement basements, and that he honestly probably pushed her hard enough to where she bonked her head to where she had internal bleeding in her head, and that he was freaking out, got his mom and dad, and that they came in, did this whole weird crime scene thing, and Patsy had written down this letter, and then they went to bed, or they stayed up the whole night trying to get this dealt with, and then had called the police around in the morning. So then when the quote-unquote kidnappers didn't call, they knew where their daughter's body was. If you guys, I really want to know what you guys' opinions on this case. Just leave them down in the comments below. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next video.